which spread out in umbrellas, groups of sundies, from which is entraced the thick and sugared milk, intoxicating as wine itself, and vignaticos, 80 feet high, whose summits shake at the passage of the lightest currents of air. What a magnificent sermon are these forests of the Amazon! Has been justly said. Yes, and we might add, what a magnificent hymn there is in the nights of the tropics! The birds were giving forth their last evening notes: Pentivis, who hang their nests on the bankside reeds; Niambus, a kind of partridge, whose song is composed of 4 notes, in perfect accord; Chamichis, with their plaintive melody; kingfishers, whose call responds like a signal to the last cry of their congeners; canindes, with their sonorous trumpets; and red macaws, who fold their wings in the foliage of the jaquetivas when night comes on to dim their glowing colors. On the jangada every one was at his post, in the attitude of repose. The pilot alone, standing in the bow, showed his tall stature, scarcely defined in the earlier shadows. The watch, with his long pole on his shoulder, reminded one of an encampment of Tartar horsemen. The Brazilian flag hung from the top of the staff in the bow, and the breeze was scarcely strong enough to lift the bunting. At 8 o'clock the 3 first tinklings of the Angelus escaped from the bell of the little chapel. The 3 tinklings of the second and third verses sounded in their turn, and the salutation was completed in the series of more rapid strokes of the little bell. However, the family after this July day remained sitting under the veranda to breathe the fresh air from the open. It had been so each evening, and while Joam Garral, always silent, was contented to listen, the young people gaily chatted away till bedtime. "Ah, our splendid river! Our magnificent Amazon!" exclaimed the young girl, whose enthusiasm for the immense stream never failed. "Unequaled river, in very truth," said Manoel, "and I do not understand all its sublime beauties. We are going down it, however, like Orellana and La Condamine did so many centuries ago, and I am not at all surprised at their marvelous descriptions." "A little fabulous," replied Benito. "Now, brother," said Minha seriously, "say no evil of our Amazon." "To remind you that it has its legends, my sister, is to say no ill of it." "Yes, that's true, and it has some marvelous ones," replied Minha. "What legends?" asked Manoel. "I dare avow that they have not yet found their way into Para, or rather that, for my part, I am not acquainted with them." "What then do you learn in the Belem colleges?" laughingly asked Minha. "I begin to perceive that they teach us nothing," replied Manoel. "What, sir!" replied Minha, with a pleasant seriousness, "you do not know, among other fables, that an enormous reptile called the minhocao sometimes visits the Amazon, and that the waters of the river rise or fall according as this serpent plunges in or quits them, so gigantic is he." "But have you ever seen this phenomenal minhocao?" "Alas, no!" replied Lina. "What a pity!" Fragoso thought it proper to add. "And the Maid Aqua," continued the girl, "that proud and redoubtable woman, whose look fascinates and drags beneath the waters of the river the imprudent ones who gaze on her." "Oh, as for the Maid Aqua, she exists!" cried the naive Lina. "They say that she still walks on the banks, but disappears like a water sprite as soon as you approach her." "Very well, Lina," said Benito; "the first time you see her just let me know." "So that she may seize you and take you to the bottom of the river? Never, Mr. Benito!" "She believes it!" shouted Minha. "There are people who believe in the trunk of Manaos," said Fragoso, always ready to intervene on behalf of Lina. "The trunk of Manaos?" asked Manoel. "What about the trunk of Manaos?" "Mr. Manoel," answered Fragoso with comic gravity, "it appears that there is, or rather formerly was, a trunk of Turuma, which every year at the same time descended the Rio Negro, stopping several days at Manaos, and going on into Para, halting at every port, where the natives ornamented it with little flags. Arrived at Belem, it came to a halt, turned back on its road, remounted the Amazon to the Rio Negro, and returned to the forest from which it had mysteriously started. One day somebody tried to drag it ashore, but the river rose in anger, and the attempt had to be given up. And on another occasion the captain of a ship harpooned it and tried to tow it along. This time again the river, in anger, broke off the ropes and the trunk mysteriously escaped. "What became of it?" asked the mulatto. "It appears that on its last voyage, Miss Lina," replied Fragoso, "it mistook the way, and instead of going up the Negro it continued in the Amazon, and it has never been seen again." "Oh, if we could only meet it!" said Lina. "If we meet it," answered Benito, "we will put you on it. It will take you back to the mysterious forest, and you will likewise pass into the state of a legendary mind." "And why not?" asked the mulatto. "So much for your legends," said Manoel, "and I think your river is worthy of them. But it has also its histories, which are worth something more. I know one, and if I were not afraid of grieving you, for it is a very sad one, I would relate it." "Oh, tell it by all means, Mr. Manoel!" exclaimed Lina. "I like stories which make you cry." "What! Do you cry, Lina?" said Benito. "Yes, Mr. Benito, but I cry when laughing." "Oh, well, let us save it, Manoel." "It is the history of a French woman whose sorrows rendered these banks memorable in the 18th century." "We are listening," said Minha. "Here goes, then," said Manoel. "In 1741, at the time of the expedition of the two Frenchmen, Bouguer and La Condamine, who were sent to measure a terrestrial degree of the equator, they were accompanied by a very distinguished astronomer, Godin des Odonais. Godin des Odonais set out then, but he did not set out alone for the New World. He took with him his young wife, his children, his father in law, and his brother in law. The travelers arrived at Quito in good health. There commenced a series of misfortunes for Madame Odonais. In a few months she lost some of her children. When Godin des Odonais had completed his work toward the end of the year 1759, he left Quito and started for Cayenne. Once arrived in this town, he wanted his family to come to him, but war had been declared, and he was obliged to ask the Portuguese government for permission for a free passage for Madame Odonais and her people. What do you think? Many years passed before the permission could be given. In 1765 Godin des Odonais, maddened by the delay, resolved to ascend the Amazon in search of his wife at Quito. But at the moment of his departure a sudden illness stopped him, and he could not carry out his intention. However, his application had not been useless, and Madame des Odonais learned at last that the King of Portugal had given the necessary permission, and prepared to embark and descend the river to her husband. At the same time an escort was ordered to be ready in the missions of the upper Amazon. Madame des Odonais was a woman of great courage, as you will see presently. She never hesitated, and notwithstanding the dangers of such a voyage across the continent, she started. "It was her duty to her husband, Manoel," said Yaquita, "and I would have done the same." "Madame des Odonais," continued Manoel, "came to Riobamba, at the south of Quito, bringing her brother in law, her children, and a French doctor. Their endeavor was to reach the missions of the Brazilian frontier, where they hoped to find a ship and the escort. The voyage at first was favorable. It was made down the tributaries of the Amazon in a canoe. The difficulties, however, gradually increased with the dangers and fatigues of a country decimated by the smallpox. Of several guides who offered their services, the most part disappeared after a few days. One of them, the last who remained faithful to the travelers, was drowned in the Bobonasa in endeavoring to help the French doctor. At length the canoe, damaged by rocks and floating trees, became useless. It was therefore necessary to get on shore, and there at the edge of the impenetrable forest they built a few huts of foliage. The doctor offered to go on in front with a negro who had never wished to leave Madrid.